Hi everyone. Hopefully, if I delay the intro to today's live stream a little bit, I can get confirmation from the chat that everything is going well. For those of you who watched the live stream I attempted to do a few months ago,
Hi everyone.
Just wasn't good
Hopefully,
enough to keep
if
up
I
with
delay the intro
necessary.
to today's
So
live stream,
I think I ended up doing a 20-minute live stream, but only about 12 minutes of it or so got recorded. Well, for those of you who watched the live stream
I don't want that to
attempted
happen again. So I'm
do a
going
few
to
months
see
ago.
what the delay
Hi
is
everyone.
like.
Wasn't good
Hopefully,
enough to keep
if
up
I
with
delay
speed.
the
But
otherwise,
to today's
so
live stream, I think I ended
welcome
up
to
doing a
today's
20-minute live stream, but only about 12 minutes of it or so
Distaff
got
spinning.
recorded.
Well, we doing some just like I did for
I don't want that to
attempted
happen again.
to
Few
miss
months
the
ago.
what the delay
Hi
is
everyone.
like. May
Wasn't
or
good
hopefully,
enough to
share.
but
Otherwise,
spinning
some
live stream, I
high,
think I ended up literally
this
this 20-second stream, but only about 12 minutes of it or
Distaff
so.
spinning.
Well,
just like I did for
I don't
want that to happen again. To miss the what the delay
Hi
is
everyone.
like.
Wasn't good
Hopefully,
enough
share.
but
Otherwise,
spinning
some
live stream, I think I ended up literally this 20-second stream, but only about 12 minutes.
I've got everything else
Distaff spinning. Well,
just like I did for
I don't
I
want that
not
to
to
happen
miss
again.
the what the delay
Hi
is
everyone.
like.
Don't know how good it's
Hopefully,
going to
share.
but
Just
otherwise,
otherwise,
some high, literally this 20-second stream, but only about 12 minutes.
I've got everything else
Distaff spinning. Well,
just like I did.
I don't want that to happen again. So, hi everyone. Don't know how good it's going to but
just
otherwise,
otherwise,
some high, literally this 20-second stream, but only about 12 minutes.
I've got everything else
Distaff spinning. Well,
just like I did.
I don't want that to happen again. So, hi everyone.
Is that it? If everyone can still hear me, that would be great. Growing pains, guys. I think that might have fixed it. I think some of the settings that I had before must have been refreshed or something, or maybe I was just randomly clicking around and it was causing things to be unchecked, like picking up two sound sources. So hopefully, if I can put this back down, there won't be any other sound loops. Okay, that was it. Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, so...
That's good.
Okay. Mr. IT guy gave me a thumbs up as well, so that's good. Okay, so given that we've got a decent amount of speed when it comes to you guys getting my video, it's about a minute or so delay, which is much better than, 15 minutes. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about a few things really quickly, waiting for everyone else to sort of join in. So first of all, I will say thank you to everyone who supported me in 2022 and in all the years before, but especially last year, because as I will announce in my next video where I talk about my New Year's resolutions, it was a year full of high highs and somewhat low lows. It was really difficult to kind of just get through everything. And so there were a lot of things that I wanted to do, and I either couldn't bring myself to do it, or I didn't have time, or I was just so stressed out about everything else that adding one more thing felt like it was going to make me crack. So I just blanked a couple of times, and sometimes, when you have injuries like I had at the end of last year, I broke my foot, it sort of puts things into perspective for you. So there were a lot of big struggles after what felt like big wins, graduating with my doctorate and everything. So 2022 is done. We'll say that. But going forward, some of the things I want to do, and hopefully we'll get to do, are more live streams now that I've got my updated internet. I don't know if I'll be able to do every week a live stream, but I would like to do them more regularly. Also depends on whether I'm off on the weekends. That's the other thing. And today was going to be work with the Zoom Loom, except when I happened to look at when Distaff Day was. It was today. So I was like, well, it would be weird to do a Zoom Loom video on Distaff Day. So basically we're going to be spinning with the Distaff on Distaff Day during this live stream and seeing how that goes. I also had a couple of really quick updates. So I have a couple of other videos that have been filmed and they're ready to be edited, so I don't know if I'll be able to keep up with weekly videos going forward because I am working full-time besides, and I will be putting more things into the shop as we go forward because I'll actually be able to get furniture for my craft room setup. I was kind of set back for about 3 months because I broke my foot and statutory sick pay is not that great. So there will be sort of like little level up moments for all of these features. So if you like to watch my content, there will be more content, regular content. I'm not going away, so look forward to that. For those of you who like to add things to their repertoire so that they can craft basically on a whim, or for people who are getting their own crafting New Year's resolutions underway, there will be fresher stuff put into the shop coming up. So please take a look at my socials where I will make those announcements there. And otherwise you can obviously check back around whenever suits you. I also had a realization that I don't have enough yarn for a blanket, so I went through my Crafting New Year's resolution video to kind of recall some of the things that I said, and one of them, which I kind of used a little bit of anyway last year, that is using what you've got. So if you're like me and you dye yarns, you buy yarns, you make yarns, you end up having a lot of stuff to choose from. And because I make a lot of content videos, sometimes I just make a bunch of yarn and then I put it somewhere. And that's what led to this sweater project, where I wanted to sort of see if I could make a decent sweater and also how much yardage I would need so that I can spin that for my crafting New Year's resolution from last year. So this is Columbia, and I used these two yarns from my stash to make this sweater. And yes, I'm wearing it even though there's this color bleed from the red into the white. Please watch that daily vlog where I sort of have a meltdown over this. But I had a lot of really great ideas. I just haven't been able to get any of them underway. So I am going to be using a lot of my Tour de Fleece yarns for this next project. And I also have a whole bunch of other yarns. So, for example, I've got these from my Tour de Fleece. I had, it was the Gulf Coast Native that I spun for the majority of my Tour de Fleece, and then my Cormo, which this isn't quite enough. I think it's just around a pound. So it would make a sort of decent size lap blanket, but I like something that really covers me. So if you remember this yarn, I did this on a faux live stream. That's where I pre-recorded it, where I took a bat where I wasn't really necessarily happy with the results, spun it, and then after the end of that I decided to make a bat using similar colors, but allowing a lot of that texture to remain, and then I applied them together. So I've got this skein, which is actually a heavier weight. So I'm going to use some of this to kind of intersperse some pops of color. And then I was dyeing some things for my mom for her Christmas present, and I've got these two skeins, which they weren't semi-solid. Now, everyone makes mistakes, and I wasn't thinking, I was in sort of production mode, so I wasn't thinking about how to do the semi-solids. So these turned out to not quite be what I wanted, so I'm going to use these in the project as well. And this really bulky merino that I must have spun with my babe back in 2011, I want to say, because I got a wheel for Christmas. And training myself from spindle spinning to wheel spinning was kind of a hurdle. So this is not really consistent at all, but it has been in my stash for over a decade at this point. And so I would rather just use it than have it sit around. So I've got basically all of these yarns, and it's about 2 pounds of wool, so I think that will be much closer to a blanket in the end. And it's going to be a paneled blanket because my loom, even though it's 32 inches, is not going to be quite wide enough. And so I'm going to do some filming with that, which I'm not really going to give too many details about at the moment, but there's a whole series I'm going to be filming for that will be released on a regular basis for the next couple of months. And that's going to be one of the projects that I promote. And for those of you who know about color pooling with knitting, this is one of the reasons why I was very frustrated with how I did this dyeing, because I did 2 batches exactly the same way, incorrectly for what I was going for. And so I have decided to use it as sock yarn. So these are going to be socks for my mom for Christmas. It's fine, she already knows about it. But I thought it was really interesting how there's this color pooling pattern that seems to kind of zigzag up in a pattern. And it was totally unintentional, and I've never seen color pooling quite like this before. If you've seen it, let me know, because I don't know of any other hand dyers that do this deliberately. And I'm curious to see if the second sock turns out the same way. But I've turned an oopsie into kind of a neat pattern so far. And so, like I said, I won't get too much into this, but this is going to be related to my crafting New Year's resolution. So stick around for that video probably next week, if I can get underway with editing. So there's that. And I can't remember if I actually showed this during a live stream or not, but this is the flax that I spun during that live stream last year. And I ended up doing 546 yards, and it's probably a lace weight yarn. It's very thin. It's a 2-ply. And I don't know if you'll really be able to see this on the live stream. You can see how thin it is. I don't know why I decided to spin so thin for the very first time that I spun flax, but there you go. So I've done that. And I boiled it in some bicarbonate water. And then while it was still wet, I basically beat it with a rolling pin. And then I hung it up outside to finish it. So, yeah. We're not going to spin that thin, I don't think, because hemp is actually a little bit different. So let's get this out. Now, I don't really know what I'm doing in terms of getting it onto the distaff. I've seen tutorials and I've done some practicing, And I do have a little bit of intuition, but when I was doing this previously, a lot of other spinners said, yep, that's totally normal, just keep doing what you're doing. So I did. But hemp, at least the way this hemp was processed, it's a longer staple length, so I think the flax ended somewhere around here. And this is probably about between 4 and 6 inches longer than the flax that I spun for that other project. So it may pose to be a really more substantial problem during this live stream. I don't know, so be prepared for this to go south. I did not try all this beforehand. That's part of the fun, sort of seeing how people respond to the material nature of something that's completely new to them. And I couldn't just dress it as is, so if you have really well processed flax, it's really easy to just pull off a handful, put it on your distaff at the top. So I've got mine just tied on here with a bit of really thickly spun merino wool. It works. And I've sort of just like zigzag crossed over this yarn to kind of tie it in place, but not too tightly. It's just so that it stays together, mostly. But because the hemp isn't as finely processed, it needs a little bit more work if you want to spin it this way. Now, the reason why I say this is because when I wanted to do some experimenting with splicing a yarn, the fact that the hemp length was able to be spliced, whereas the flax couldn't. It was already like in really thin strands already. This, you could actually get your fingers in there and pull them apart so that you could get 2 strands from one length of fiber. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, please go to my inventory of videos and look for my video on splicing, because that clarifies exactly everything that I've just said. So in order to prepare this for draft spinning, which is different than splicing, I actually needed to comb this a little bit more so that the individual strands would be separated more, so I could get a slightly thinner yarn, because I didn't want to make rope, but I also didn't know how this was going to work out, because I don't actually have a hackle. So what I did is the same hairbrush, the hair comb that I use for my hair in the shower, I used to comb each length here, and I think I have it all oriented the same direction, but I can't guarantee. So from what I understand, you want to keep all of the top part together and all of the root end together, but I have no idea if I've been that organized. So also feel free to post questions into the chat, because I can see that, and if you have any other like comments or anything like that. I am going to do spun, so that basically means I'm going to go into the clockwise or counterclockwise direction. Which direction does the clock go? I'm going to go this way. So I'm going to spin it dry, because I don't necessarily need to spin it wet. I learned that from the flax spinning. And then this actually marks the first spinning that I have done this year. So if that sounds crazy, it's because it is. And the reason why is because I've been focusing on knitting those socks and getting other things prepared, so including like just filming myself doing various steps so that I can have that all together in a video. And the other thing about the way that this hemp is processed, there's a lot of the stem that was adhered to it that was still on it, so I had to kind of pull that off, and the best way to do that was to do a combination of brushing it with the comb and just with two hands gripping either end, just kind of tugging, like making a little bit of slack and then tugging it, because I didn't want to rake my fingers through it and I didn't want to overbrush it to remove that stuff. So that was the best way I could think of to make that happen. And so far so good. I'm trying to not, oh, oops. So I was just going to say, I'm trying to not make it too thin. And then while I was focusing on grabbing the next section, I lost the end. So, just to update what's happening in the chat, we've got Cheryl, who said that she's spinning on a spindle for, Shetland, for shawls. It sounds lovely. And my cat, Layla, which you can't see, but she's right around that corner, she's sleeping on a radiator. And I can hear her turning down the temperature. So when I go over there, it's going to say 7 degrees Celsius. But she's over there being quiet and staying out of my hair, so that's fine. And then we had Karen, who said she's working on a crocheted mandala throw using hand-dyed yarn. Sounds great. And Cheryl said that she's dyeing in the wool for the first time using natural dyes. Ooh, tell us, what natural dyes are you using? I'd be curious to know. So, I'd say this yarn so far is about twice as thick as what I was spinning before. So if we're going by a 2-ply, this is probably going to be, I'm guessing around a fingering weight. For those of you who actually do more with flax spinning, maybe you can explain to me what happens when you finish a yarn in the baking soda, because I found that the color darkened and grayed considerably. I don't know if that's going to actually happen with hemp. I'd be curious if it did. But if you happen to know what's happening, that would be really great if you could either put it into the chat or in the comments if you're watching this in the future. Oh, we've got another one. Hi, Katura. Must be morning where you are. You can see behind me. It's, what, 4:20 in the afternoon, and it's already dark. One of the things I really had to get used to living in the UK is we're far enough north for the short days of winter to be more noticeable. So I think we get somewhere around 7.5 hours of daylight, although really only about 6.5 if you don't count sunrise and sunset, because it's still pretty dark during those moments as well. But when I was living in the Midwest, you'd still get about 9 hours or thereabouts of daylight, even in the dead of winter, near the solstice. So, yeah. I'm more used to it now, but remember when I was first here, I was kind of surprised at how little sun I actually saw during the winter. And then conversely, during the summer, my parents used to use when the sun goes down was the time I needed to be home. And yeah, that would have meant I would be getting home after playing outside all day at around 11 or 11:15 at night, which is so late. Especially when you're, you know, a little kid. Normally I would have been in bed somewhere around 10:30 during the summer because it wasn't really a school time, so it would have been fine. So this is actually going about as planned. So I've got some chunky bits. And I think because it isn't as finely hackled as my flax, it would be difficult trying to make a really thin yarn. But I will still try to make it consistent. So I didn't feel like I had quite enough yarn in my original flax project to actually make anything, but since these have pretty much the same tensile strength, I say that with an asterisk. If you want to know what I mean by that, please check out a video that I have under the community questions playlist where I talk about this, because the tensile strength of these fibers is actually variable, even if they are considered plant fibers, or sorry, bast fibers. Because there's actually a noticeable difference depending on whether you use it wet or dry, and also if you're using nettle or hemp or lime bast. So if you're curious about that, please check out that video. But for the purposes of what I would want to use it for, it'd be something like making placemats. Then I want them to be roughly similar so that I could use them in that project together. I also had considerably more of this hemp for the same price. So I think I got 100 grams of flax for the same price as 250 grams of the hemp. Hemp is also pretty easy to grow. It's not as demanding on the environment as flax growing is, although you still will undergo the retting process, which produces kind of toxic waste as a result. So, you know, there is that. It's one of the things that makes splicing kind of more environmentally friendly as a method, because you don't have to go through the retting process. So retting literally means to rot, and so you are rotting the fibers in a controlled manner using either like the dew-retted method, where you just lay out your flax or your hemp or whatever, your bast fiber, and you let that sit in a field and you let the damp kind of accumulate and then dry, and accumulate and then dry, and you do that over several weeks. And that sort of process will loosen the inner fiber from the outer stem so that you can process it into a spinnable fiber that's draftable. But with splicing, you can literally splice with freshly harvested flax or hemp or nettle. So if you are familiar with the Facebook group Nettles for Fibers, it's something that they do a lot there. So if this is the first time you've really heard of it, please check out that Facebook group. Maybe I'd try hemp, or maybe a combination, so it's not just one experiment that I'm doing. But yeah, we'll see what I have the time to do. So if you don't have to go through that rotting process, then it's actually not as toxic for the environment if you're not using all of this water to deliberately rot your bast fiber, because the result actually produces quite a lot of waste. And I read a paper from, I want to say it was either the end of the 19th century or the very early part of the 20th century in America, where manufacturers of flax were talking about what to do with all of this wastewater, because that was also a time when you get a lot more factory-produced spun fibers and fabrics, and so the waste and contaminants becomes a much bigger problem. So yeah, I think the main difference is splicing usually takes a lot longer to do, even if you are really good at doing it, because in the strictest sense, you are limited by what your hands and coordinating your hands can actually do, whereas we're also incorporating an extra tool, in this case the spinning wheel. So yeah, you can do some splicing or thigh spinning that would expedite it more than if you just twirled it around on your fingers and wound it on a stick or even a rock. But yeah, it's difficult, but it is really interesting to kind of think about, and this is definitely one of the things that I think about when I'm doing stuff like this. So we've got Jennifer's shown up. No worries. Being late is just fashionable, right? Fashionably on time. And when we talk about stuff like this, we often will make reference to the medieval periods where distaff spinning and distaff day was really something that we end up recording, I guess, as information. So during the Roman period, you get in Italy, for example, sort of late I want to say late Bronze Age to early Iron Age in Italy, you do get evidence of distaffs. So Margherita Gleba, her PhD research looked at textile production during this later prehistory period in sort of like the pre-Roman Iron Age, but it was also used during the Roman period in the same region. And what's really interesting about research is it's all based on the way societies are set up. And so for me as a researcher, it's really difficult to argue that all societies that used a bast fiber like hemp or nettle or flax, they would all have come up with the same solution. And that's not true, because it's based on the environment and what the society needs and the ways that they have interacted with neighbors and their environment, their landscapes. All this stuff actually bears on even which tools they end up making. So if you consider the impact of a distaff on the spinning process, just as a general note, it makes the ability to walk and spin a lot easier. You can load this up with a lot more fiber than you could just necessarily hold in one hand, and it's pretty continuous. So you don't really have to stop for anything. You don't have to stop to grab a new rolag. You don't have to stop and prep more fiber. You just have this giant big thing set up so that you can just spin non-stop. Well, if you don't have something like a distaff, that's actually going to change the rate of production a little bit. Maybe not a lot, or maybe a lot, who knows? These numbers are sort of educated speculation. And when you talk about the Iron Age of Britain, which I studied, we don't necessarily have any kind of evidence for a distaff, and if they did use one, it would probably be wood, like the one I'm using, although this is a medieval model. I got this from, I think it was an Etsy shop that focused on reenactment tools. And so I don't know if during the Iron Age period, people who lived in southeast Britain used something like this. They also didn't necessarily use a draftable bast fiber. So if I was using flax, let's say, instead, we don't have much in the record that shows whether they were making it spinnable by going through the retting process or if they were splicing it. The only point of reference that we really have is at the very, very end of the Bronze Age, the transition into the Iron Age, at Must Farm, that was sort of researched quite intensely by Margarita Glabat and Susanna Harris. They showed that the people there were splicing yarns rather than draft spinning. So this is part of the reason why I wanted to do some videos on draft spinning, and I just applied the principle to hemp, but they would have used either flax or nettle, which in this case they used flax. They may not have needed anything like a distaff, and during the earlier Iron Age period, you see the sudden increase, or relatively sudden increase in the importance of sheep and sheep products such as wool. And so it would be difficult to say from that evidence that these people were also draft spinning their bast fiber. They may have been, but we don't really have any tools, at least nothing that I have seen so far from that time period, to suggest that they were doing draft spun yarns. And so, you know, like, if they were using plant fibers, which they more than likely were, how were they spinning it? And my guess is they're not necessarily doing it this way, although they could be. It's very interesting to think about, because just as I said, during this similar period, although temporally it occurred earlier than the British Iron Age, which started around 800 BC. So the people who lived in the Mediterranean even earlier than that, during the Bronze and Iron Ages of that region, they did have evidence for distaff. Oh my goodness, I've gotten my first spammer in the chat. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can get rid of this person. Report that. It is explicit, and I don't want any of that in here. So I'm going to delete these. Apologies to anyone who was offended. Sorry. Always got to be ruining our fun. Yeah, so it's interesting to think about how we sort of have come to believe that a lot of these things are constants, right? But in the past, they may not have been. And so whenever I talk about like my research or the experiments that are informed by the research I've done, and just kind of exploring what might be possible, doesn't necessarily mean that they used it this way or did it that way or produced these kinds of things, but just using what evidence we have and then sort of keeping an open mind in the way that we interpret the evidence, so that we don't restrict creativity or sort of reduce what people might have been capable of given their tool base. So yeah, it's just the distaff is really a fascinating tool for lots of reasons, and its history in my own research is probably non-existent, although I couldn't say for certain because my research period spanned about 800 years. So even though the rate of technological developments was much, much slower back then than it is, say, for us, right? 20 years ago, the internet was completely different. And explaining that actually to young people is always really fascinating because they're like, well, I didn't know that. I was talking to one of my young coworkers who thought the sound that dial-up makes was from a TikTok video. And I had to explain, no, that's what dial-up sounds like. It predated TikTok by a considerable amount of time. So inevitably there would have been some interactions with different groups of people. That, you know, people are moving around. There's a lot of interaction with Britain and Europe during this period of time. So, and you know, you've also got the Roman invasion, the unsuccessful one in around 55 BC, and then obviously the successful one later on, about 100 years later. So there's a lot of communication with Europe, even at the end of the Bronze Age in my study region. So it's quite possible that people there were exposed to the distaff and may have adopted it just to make fabrics that were more like what they would have been exposed to by those Romans. So, you know, how open were the people in charge of textile production to these changes? So, I mean, as with everything, you're going to have people who are much more traditionalists and those that are much more in vogue. So it really, you couldn't say, you know, that a lot of people would or a lot of people wouldn't, or specifically where you could spot it or where you might not be able to see it, because if it's made out of wood, if you don't have good site preservation or you don't have to excavate that one spot, you may never know. And so it's just a fascinating topic to discuss. Now, as with all things, people may have also been using smaller distaffs for things like wool. So you could also argue that maybe they're not using them for draftable bast fibers, but maybe they're using it for wool. So that's also possible. And I wouldn't be able to tell you, based on the research I've done and the evidence I've seen, whether the sites that I looked at, Danebury, would have had any kind of tool that could be used in conjunction with a distaff. And since we don't have any fabrics to look at, I couldn't even look at the yarns and say whether it was draft spun or not. So, yeah, interesting stuff. So it looks like Jennifer is randomly spinning her advent calendar, crocheting a scarf cowl, and using homespun yarn. Sounds like you're doing a lot. How do you guys feel about these advent calendars? Because I saw a recent post from someone else saying that it was non-thematic and she was struggling to find a way to make all of the fibers that she got for this calendar kind of go as a project. And for those of you who do get them, what do you make from them? Do you sort of like spin each day? I know that Evie from Jillian Eve, she does an advent calendar as well. I saw when those went live, I was just so surprised because I was like, oh my gosh, it's already that time to start thinking about. Because I've always thought about getting one or suggesting to get one, but I've still never gotten one. And I remember way back, I don't know if you guys use them, or I don't know, I think they're still around, the Fat Fiber Club. Because I know they did an indie yarn box, and then later they started doing a Fiber Club box, where you would get a whole bunch of samples from, I think it was like 20 different indie dyers, but they would always have like a huge list of indie dyers. So you would get 20 samples, but there might have been like 100 contributors total. And I always thought that was really interesting for me because it gave me a chance to sort of see how other dyers did stuff or blended colors together. So I used it as more of like an educational thing, but it, you know, it was fun. It was fun to do, but I kind of spun them for research and understanding than for any particular craft. So my experience is kind of different compared to what most people's will be. Cheryl said that Evie did a 12-day advent calendar. I think she did a 25-day one it would have been 2021. And when I talked to her about the end of that, she said it was very exhausting. And I can imagine just having done the Tour de Fleece, trying to, film myself, edit and upload and make sure everything went off without a hitch afterwards. It was a huge challenge trying to get through that. So, and she did it, and I'm just shocked. So yeah, I mean, even with 12 samples, that's quite a lot that you would have to coordinate, and I don't know how much fiber you end up getting. Maybe 12, but slightly larger samples or something. You might be able to get away with enough fiber for maybe a sweater at the end of all that. I mean, 100 grams sounds like a lot, but maybe like 50 grams. Maybe make a couple pairs of mittens or socks or something, or like a large shawl, or maybe like a cropped cardigan or something. That'd be cool. So, oh! It surprised me by running away. 2 ounce samples. Yeah, so that's about 50 grams. Slightly more, I think it's 56 grams, is about 2 ounces. So that little end got away from me. But I am happy with how nicely this is spinning, and I'm attributing that in part to the extra effort to process it a bit more before putting it on the distaff. I'm trying not to say distaff. I think my whole life I must have said it this way because the compulsion to say it that way is really strong. At the end of the day, who cares how you pronounce it? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so 2 ounce samples, about 50. I mean, you could definitely make a sweater for a young person, or even a sweater and an accessory with all of that. I've also thought about doing similar things where I make like a giant mix bag and sell kind of like random bits of this and that. But I also don't know, I guess, is that an interesting thing to be given as a gift or to buy? I remember when I first started carding, I would save all those little extra bits because I didn't really have a lot of money, and so I was not going to throw it away. And when I moved to the UK, I actually didn't have all of that stuff. And because I had saved all of that for my pottage bats, or potage bats, I kind of got used to having this bag or couple of bags of random bits that came with my drum carder. I didn't realize until I came to the UK and I had my carder but not all that other stuff, just how all those little extra bits were my favorite. Like, I love crafting with those random off bits that didn't fit into the original bat, so I saved them to be used in something else. Now I've got like 4 bags. I need to get back to making bats, but I need a table, and it's currently up there covered in a blanket because my cat Layla, she runs around this corner in the house, and then she runs up all of the things that we have stacked up like stairs, and then she jumps up on it, and I'm afraid that she's gonna not realize that it's spiky and just hurt her paws. She's definitely one of those do first, think about it later cats. So yeah, it's just, everything is crazy and chaotic after my foot being broken, and then being kind of in the middle of purchasing furniture to accommodate a craft room setup. And it's not even elaborate, but just I need a table. And so I actually timed myself the other day trying to sort of see how long it would take me to prepare 3 orders. And it was over an hour. And it's because